It was the practice generally of the Eastern churches and some churches of the West. For in the Church of Milan it seems the Saturday was held in a far esteem, not that the Eastern churches, or any of the rest which observed that day, were inclined to Judaism, but that they came together on the Sabbath day, to worship Jesus Christ, the Lord of the Sabbath. They despise our sun god. Did not Zoroaster, the sainted founder of our divine beliefs, institute Sunday 1,000 years ago, in honour of the sun, and supplant the Sabbath of the Old Testament, which the Jews in our land then sanctified? Yet these Christians have divine services on Saturday. The Nestorians eat no pork and keep the Sabbath. They believe in neither auricular confession nor purgatory. Bulgaria, in the early season of its evangelization, had been taught that no work should be performed on the Sabbath. Abyssinian or Ethiopian Christianity kept, among other things, the Sabbath for more than 17 centuries. In 1534, the Abyssinian legate at the court of Lisbon was told, "It is not, therefore, in imitation of the Jews, but in obedience to Christ and his holy apostles, that we observe the day." The God of the Bible once said to the believers that the Sabbath was a sign that they worshipped the only true God, and not a false God. The Sabbath was not only a sign that they kept the original teachings, but was also to be an example to the apostate Christians that fell away. It showed that the true believers regarded the Bible to be higher than the decisions and authority of the church. The apostate Christians tried to persuade them that they were chosen of God to be church leaders and that their decisions were blessed by God. Then, when various groups of Christians kept the Sabbath, it threatened their self-proclaimed authority and they started to attack them. If they were not going to believe that they were the chosen of God, then they would force them to believe it. And that's how the persecution against God's people who kept the commandments began. When the Roman Empire gave the power to the bishops of Rome, and the papacy started their rule of over 1,200 years, then the persecution of the Sabbath-keeping Christians intensified, until they were almost completely wiped out. And now they have almost been wiped out of the history books as well. Even now, Sabbath-keeping Christians are being demonized by some who still insist on observing Sunday. They suffer the same accusations today as they have done for the last 2,000 years. The Catholic people had full religious freedom, while the Christians who held fast to God's commandments and had the faith of Jesus were persecuted, tortured, and killed. While the Catholic Church built grand cathedrals with extravagant decor and enjoyed decadent attire, the Christians who kept God's commandments were forced to worship God in exile, in caves and in dens. Among them were the Waldenses in North Italy, who used this actual cave as a place of worship. They continue to spread the text of the Bible, which came from the schools of Antioch.
The Spirit of Christ is also the spirit of missionary work. So it was with the Waldenses. They couldn't just keep the truth they had learned for themselves, but they felt compelled to share it with others. And when the Bible was forbidden, they copied it and taught their youth in its truths. From here, the school of Barba, in Pra del Torno. In the Dark Ages, the Bible was reserved for the Catholic priests, and it was forbidden to copy it. Despite risking their lives, they rebelled against these prohibitions, and they copied and smuggled out the Bible from places such as this. The mountains that girded their lowly valleys were a constant witness to God's creative power, and a never-failing assurance of His protecting care. Those pilgrims learned to love the silent symbols of Jehovah's presence. They indulged no repining because of the hardships of their lot. They were never lonely amid the mountain solitudes. They thanked God that He had provided for them an asylum from the wrath and cruelty of men. They rejoiced in their freedom to worship before Him. Often, when pursued by their enemies, the strength of the hills proved a sure defense. From many a lofty cliff they chanted the praise of God, and the armies of Rome could not silence their songs of thanksgiving.
It was the Roman Emperor Justinian who made a decree that the Pope was to have both religious and political power, and when the Goths in 538 AD were driven out of Rome, then the Pope solidified his power. All this was prophesied beforehand by the prophet Daniel, the Apostle John, and Paul. A falling away would come, a false gospel would be preached, and an Antichrist will come forth from the ruins of the Roman Empire and place himself as a leader, even as a god in the Christian Church. He would receive his power from the dragon or from the Roman Empire, and will continue with the same cruelty and teachings of their heathen gods, but this time cloaked in Christianity. Here you can see the Roman gods Dionysus and Pan in Constantine, and Justinian's summer palace, proving they clung to their pagan gods despite outwardly promoting the Christian faith. In Justinian's aqueduct, we can see the Roman mythological figure Medusa. Medusa had the hair of serpents and was to the Romans a goddess who protected the warriors, houses, and buildings. Here in Ephesians you can also see her with the famous serpent, and she's now posing in the ceiling of the Vatican. When the Roman religious power decided to replace their pagan gods with Christ, they began on a religious struggle for power that the Pope continued. Pagan mentality just with Christian names. Many pagan temples were simply turned into Christian churches. This church in Rome is built upon an old Mithra temple. Mithra was the son of the sun god, the bringer of light and the saviour. Here is a famous depiction of Mithra, with an illustration of the sun and the moon god either side, and here on a statue of Diana.